And my first name is Ammon, and he was the only person in the Book of Mormon who was a pacifist. See, I went to prison in 1917. I was head of the Socialist Club. I was Secretary of the Revolution. That's pretty good for a kid. When I talk to Protestants, they say, why'd you join the worst church? When I talk to Catholics, they say, how let a guy like you in?
Yes, Ammon was anti-capitalistic. During the First World War, he did not lose his socialist ideals, and he refused to cooperate with the draft.
That was in Columbus, Ohio. And then we were arrested, each one, 20 of us, put in a different cell. It's in the paper, me and another guy, to be shot, extreme penalty, Monday. Down there it said maybe, but I didn't see the maybe.
He went to prison for 2 years as a result.
I was a socialist, I was an atheist, and I was not a pacifist.
That's right. He went in as a socialist and atheist, and he came out as an anarchist and a Christian.
I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what anarchism is. Anarchism is not about just overthrowing all order and having chaos. You know, what it's about is decentralization and about people taking responsibility for their own lives and centering power in the individual and in the community, not in some larger framework of hierarchy.
My name's Daniel Jameson. This is from his autobiography, The Book of Ammon. And the interviewer is asking him some questions, and the interviewer states, "You are not practical." And Ammon replies, "I am the most practical fellow you can find. The dictionary says being practical is pertaining or relating to practice or action. You might say that we anarchists are the original do-it-yourself folks."
Diane Hennacy is the grandniece of Ammon Hennacy. She's a psychiatrist. She has requested and received all the material assembled by the FBI through the Freedom of Information Act.
Well, in doing my research about my uncle, one of the things that I read about him was that he had an FBI agent trail him practically every day of his life for over 30 years. This is the file here. It gives you an idea. Ammon was known for public fasting to draw attention to the immorality of socially acceptable violence.
Ammon picketed against the violence of genocidal U.S. nuclear weapons. The nuclear industry produces toxic hazards of concentrated radioactive pollution, also known as poison fire. What do you call this place?
What do you call this place?
Aztlan?
Turtle Island.
The United States?
A land rich in poison fire. It's unbelievable and sickly essential to think about poison fire and the first aid of nuclear abolition.
Conventional wisdom says that humans should not permanently damage our Earth.
The legacy of nuclearism is graphically central in this segment of the coil, spanning the 1890s to the current time. There's many issues for people of conscience in our society. Their prophetic witness encompasses a range of disciplines in trying to create a security in their homeland, a true peace forged through various methods.
Henry David Thoreau wrote one of my favorite books, which was Walden, that I read at an early age and really loved. And of course there's his essay on civil disobedience, which has been very formative for a lot of us who've done civil disobedience.
I think in the last 100 years a lot of progress has been made. We've seen a lot of changes happen, but I also feel like there's so much we have to work on. And I do, when I think back in time to like, oh, what was it like 100 years ago, I feel like I could identify with sisters and brothers who have been struggling through time to create justice in this world. So, and I feel like it's just as like our feelings of despair or whatever probably could be matched, even though we've seen progress has happened in human rights. I feel like, yeah, there's still a lot we can do. So I feel solidarity with people from 100 years ago. Being here today at the cemetery and seeing Emma Goldman's gravesite, it inspires me to read a biography that I have of her.
She was born in Russia and emigrated to the United States. And she started to become an activist through the labor movement, and she was a big proponent for workers' rights.
She said to me that the state is my enemy.
Was kind of a very vocal person for anarchy and wrote essays and books about it. And so that was kind of her political philosophy, but she was involved with a lot of different things. She just had a really big heart and cared about so many different things. But basically in the end, she was deported from the United States for her beliefs, for being an anarchist, and sent back to Russia. Right now, my paid work is working for the Redwood Peace and Justice Center, and that's where we are. And this is a local organization that was started about a year ago. And the purpose of the center is to serve as a resource for all the different activists and organizations in the area. It's a place where people can connect up with each other and organize, and we have computers and a library and a video library. So we're just trying to serve as a resource to bring everyone together. There's a lot of really powerful, strong activists in this area, and so it's important to have the center here for people to use.
Veterans for Peace, Inc. was started in 1985 by Jerry Vinicio, who actually didn't even know about the earlier Veterans for Peace. And we probably have 70 or 75 chapters, active chapters around the country, of which one is here in Arcata. There actually was an earlier Veterans for Peace started after World War II, 47. Now the VA acknowledges that all veterans who were in Vietnam are presumed to have been exposed by Agent Orange. This is fairly recent. That means at least 2.8 million soldiers, including myself, were exposed presumptively, according to the VA. Depleted uranium has been used as armor to resist penetration, but it's mostly been used as the armor on projectiles, both bullets, small arms ammunition, as well as larger projectiles, especially used as for tank killers and bunkers. Like the Pentagon for years denied that Agent Orange had any impact on human beings. The Pentagon is claiming this for depleted uranium, and and yet we have 10,000 soldiers from Gulf War I who've died. We have 270,000 who filed claims out of the 696,000 who were in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and southern Iraq. The United States War Department uses various substances and munitions to assume some kind of superiority in warfare without examining the implications of their various chemical, biological, nuclear and conventional weapons. There has never been chemical warfare like in Vietnam. That was chemical warfare, unprecedented, with Agent Orange, Agent White, Agent Blue, Agent Green. There were 4 of them.
Peace be with you. No blood for oil. Impeach Bush. And bring our kids home alive with all of their arms and legs attached. No more amputees. No more blood for oil. Impeach Bush and bring our kids home alive with their arms and legs attached. No more amputees. Peace be with you. Peace be with you. I'll give you my 2 favorite jail names. I am Barabbas and No More Nukes. And I vigiled on many federal building lawns, and they told me I have to leave, and they always have backed off that I could vigil. Is this a sticker?
Hey, they let you guys know that you need to terminate, wrap up, and be out of here by 4 o'clock.
I'm not leaving here.
Okay, we don't have to accommodate you forever. Well, at 1600, if you don't go, we're going to give you a dispersal order, and if you don't leave, we're going to take you into custody. You understand that?
That I'm kind of riled up, not being able to get in there today. I wanted to go to the Armed Forces celebration in there. This is Armed Forces Day that it's advertised.
They don't let veterans in?
They absolutely would not. I heard it on the radio. If you didn't hear it, I heard it coming here. I was a downwinder from the Hanford Nuclear Weapons Plant, and I sat 9 months on that lawn. You can put that in there if you want, and maybe I'll be here in 9 months and break that record. I don't know. Iraq has fallen, and Austria fell to Hitler.
We couldn't sleep. We just literally couldn't sleep. And we were organizing and protesting and speaking because we'd been to Iraq. We were just could not find peace. So we thought that we needed to do something more, that we needed to do something that had us feel like we did the best we could for the people of Iraq. And so we went through a discernment process, and on April 14th we went out to Vandenberg Air Force Base, had a prayer vigil for about 45 minutes, and then at the end of the prayer vigil I got up on the wall with 4 ounces of blood that I collected from my arm, and we threw it on the sign.
I am Tensi Hernandez, and my husband is Dennis Appo. Though it was Dennis who did the action, we both did it. What we actually did, though, was specifically inspired by friends who had poured blood on the Pentagon. And they had done that as also an act of witness to the atrocities of this country. At this point in our life, it would be best for our children if Dennis were to do the action and not myself, since they're so young.
And it's a system where the people that do the killing don't have to be confronted with the blood. They don't have to see the consequences of that. We felt that an appropriate kind of a symbolic act would be for them to see some blood, because that's what you're talking about. And especially in war, you're talking about people's lives, and blood being a symbol of their lives, and the loss of that blood being a symbol of their death. So I think that it's a powerful symbol. I tend to look at things like this comparatively. When I sprayed blood on the sign at Vandenberg, there was a lot of backlash from that. We're in a conservative area. There's a lot of folks who really took exception to that. That's a violent act, they would say. And some folks would say banging on an A-10 Warthog, which delivers depleted uranium weapons with a hammer and doing really minimal damage, is a violent act. But I look at it comparatively. I want to know from people who are appalled at blood on the sign at Vandenberg why they are more appalled by that than a child's blood flowing in the street, or a man or a woman's blood. Why does that not appall them more than, blood on a sign that was washed off before I was even finished being booked, and no life was endangered by that? Phil Berrigan and his brother Dan, along with 7 other folks, broke into draft files, then took them out and burned them in the street using homemade napalm, and they went to prison for that.
We make our prayer in the name of that God whose name is peace and decency and unity and love.
The draft board action at Catonsville helped to give a sense of coherence, a sense of the rootedness of resistance by risking jail, risking life and limb, and saying no as a matter of the Christian values to oppose war. The fact that there were people of faith involved, I think, was profoundly stabilizing, and for me had the effect of saying this is really what it has to be about, and it helped to focus my own attention on being clearer about what resistance must involve. And community is at the heart of it. It isn't government. Government is not the key to our hope for the future. In fact, as Isaiah reminded us over 2,600 years ago, we have to disarm. We have to convert swords into plowshares, and we have to give up the whole business of war. When people take up their hammers and hammer these weapons, that's when the weapons cease to exist. weapons that have no right to exist, stop existing when we become the instruments of their non-existence. And I think that that's, in a simple way, what civil disobedience is about. You blockade the war makers, you sit down in front of their operations to stop their operations. You stop war by stopping war, by getting in the way of the military machinery. And that's something very simple to do, but it's also very dangerous and complicated.
I've come to the realization that the power of nonviolent direct action rests on two things. It rests on the willingness to undergo suffering rather than inflict it, and that's a quote from Wally Nelson's wonderful definition of nonviolence. But it also comes from the embracing of a paradox, that if you sit in the front of a bus, or if you sit down at a segregated lunch counter, or if you go to the sea to gather salt, you're simultaneously saying yes and saying no. You're saying, no, this law is wrong, and I'm going to violate it because it's wrong. But you're also saying, yes, everyone should be able to do this. And sitting down in the road on Gibson Avenue in Albuquerque and on Diamond Drive in Los Alamos, I don't actually think that anybody, for any reason, should be able to block traffic. If somebody blocks traffic for the cause of cruel treatment to animals, or for Nazism, or for, you know, some other thing that I wouldn't approve of, I would condemn the action. So I think the action itself has to have value in and of itself.
When I do activism, I like to be able to bring my spirituality there, to not just protest against things, but to do it in a way that involves creativity, involves joy, involves acknowledgement of this larger energy field that we're all part of. So we often do ritual as part of our actions.
We have to, in the words of the IWW, in the words of the Catholic worker movement, we have to build the new society within the shell of the old. And economically, we have to look in the mirror. We have to look in the mirror and see what we are doing, because I can't necessarily stop what George Bush is doing. I can't necessarily stop what the IMF or the World Bank are doing, but I can stop my participation in the economic system that they sustain.
And the funny thing is, everybody believes in peace and freedom, even the President of the United States. Peace and freedom, bravo! But you take peace and freedom to what it really means, pacifism and anarchism, and everybody becomes frightened. So, but that'll be chaos. And I think us anarchists today are trying to prove that it isn't chaos.
Mm-hmm. Because anarchism is not a philosophy of disorganization or chaos. It is a philosophy of voluntary organization, of consensus, of people working together. It is not against the idea of social order, it's against the idea of social coercion. So the part of the whole vision of a radical way of life is life on the land. And Ammon did that in Arizona when he did irrigating and so on. And he did irrigating, pruning, and things like that. Taxes were not withheld from agricultural workers at the time.
When we talk about the trillions of dollars that have been spent for these weapons, for these bombs, for the wars, it takes money to do that. And if they don't get the money, they're not going to be able to do it.
The red area is what portion of your tax dollars that you pay to the government go to past, present, and future wars. And then the other shaded area is civilian. Ammon Hennacy was a person who thought outside the box and who acted, even if he was alone in the action, he would be there. He showed up.
He certainly wrote the income tax people and said, here's what I owe, see if you can get it. And of course, you can't squeeze water out of a stone. He really had very little, so Internal Revenue never got the money.
You don't create change by doing something one day a month or one day a year. It has to be your whole life.
And so it hurts sometimes to see people filing into churches, engaging in piety together on a Sunday, and yet bankrolling, paying for the kind of weaponry, the kind of destruction, the kind of bloodletting and killing that is exactly the opposite of what Jesus had preached.
And Ammon was great at pointing out the hypocrisy of those who are what he called pacifists between wars, or like being vegetarians between meals, he said. So nonviolence is a broader concept. The one-person revolution occurs when I say, I have sovereignty over my own life. I'm responsible to God or to nature for my conduct, how I live, what I do. I have no power over other people. I don't want to have power or control over other people because that's not revolutionary. And we build that revolution one brick at a time, see? One brick at a time, and you gotta knock off all the accretions that stand in the way of the brick working.
In England, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament used the semaphore signals for the letters N and D, as in nuclear disarmament. N and D. Later, the peace movement turned this symbol into one for peace instead of simply nuclear abolition.
Gandhi certainly is a hero of mine. I think that Gandhi lived up to his beliefs and the beliefs of nonviolence. He also lived extremely simply, so he did not take advantage of other people.
Ammon had written to Mohandas Gandhi, and Mohandas Gandhi wrote back,
I'm sorry to say, however, that I am not always able to carry out my belief into practice. It is my constant endeavor to do so. I find it very difficult, living in the midst of temptation, to enforce my belief in full. Yours sincerely, M.K. Gandhi. I suppose Ammon Hennacy is one of my heroes. He certainly lived up to his beliefs. I have been involved in nonviolent civil disobedience on a few occasions.
Back in December 1969, Alcatraz was a defining moment for many, many Indian people. It was a catalyst that began a movement throughout this country, which resulted in many Indian people retaining their dignity, regaining their pride and self-esteem, and their return to the tribal traditions, practices, and customs. I myself made a trip and a visit, a pilgrimage of sorts, to San Francisco, the Bay Area, and Alcatraz Island.
What type of struggle are we in? We're in the struggle to demonstrate freedom. And freedom, you don't vote for it, you don't shoot for it, you don't tell other people what to do about it. Freedom is what you do yourself. And no one said you're going to have an easy time because you insist on being free.
We are in a period that will be dark for many, many days, and the war on Afghanistan, the war on Iraq, the war on terror, which has many, many facets and is played out on a daily basis in many parts of the world, including in the United States, is continuing to intensify, and it makes all of the work that people have been doing for social justice on a daily basis more difficult, and it also makes the need to step up at crisis moments greater, but all the time more and more people are getting engaged in political work.
But the general public felt something was possible in '68 that isn't possible now. And they taught that to their children. And they got a whole generation of people who felt nothing is possible now. And then a new generation came. The young people are saying, what do you mean I'm born too late? I'm here now. I'm going to create the world I want, and I'm not going to say, oh, that was possible then, but it's not possible now. It is possible now.
I felt that it was possible to actually destroy the capitalist imperialist system.
Judy Berry worked here in Northern California on forest defense, and she tried to bring forest defenders and loggers together and was pretty effective in that.
What everybody has been asking me for the last 2 days is like, how do you organize timber workers? How do you organize loggers? How do you get loggers to talk to other people? And the first answer is you have to like loggers. That's the first thing, and I already did. The conditions of my life are actually more similar to them than to the privileged environmentalists in the city. So the espresso-sucking pavement dwellers, as we call them. But so being from a rural area myself and being a working class person myself, I can relate.
The Earth First activists, I know lots and lots of them who are up in the trees and daily facing incredible violence from the forest companies. I just think they're the most amazing people around. When I was a teenager, it was in the 60s, it was that time when everybody was searching spiritually. I had a very strong Jewish upbringing and very good grounding in that tradition. But what I found was that my own real spiritual experiences happened in nature. And one of the things permaculture teaches us to do is to look at patterns, and look at patterns in nature. And that's something I think that indigenous people have always done. If you look around, you see the patterns in the trees and the leaves and the branches. It's the same pattern that you'll see in a river system or in the veins of your own arm or your hands and fingers. It transfers something. It's a pattern of flow. It's a pattern of collecting and concentrating and dispersing.
The way I look at it is God is a God of peace and love, who created the whole beautiful earth and the stars and the sun and the moon and the universe. It's just magnificent creation, the animals and the birds and it's all this great beauty. Jesus is the incarnation of this beautiful creator God. And his whole message is love one another and be peaceful to one another, not only to all human beings, but actually to creation itself. And he talks about, look at the birds, look at the lilies of the field. And he's trying to teach us about, trusting in God and not worrying. And see, God takes care of the birds of the air and the lilies of the field. The first thing that I find so moving about that is because to say something like that, you have to be a contemplative who thinks about the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. How many of us do that? Jesus was a contemplative who was in awe of the beauty of creation.
The reason that I could even be in Earth First, I'm really a movement person. I've been an Earth Firster for 2 years, and I've been in the movement for 20 years. And I've been in all aspects of the movement, the peace movement, labor movement, everything, and anti-nuclear, etc. And the reason why I would even choose Earth First to work with, besides, the radicalism, the sense of humor, the music, but the decentralization is one of the things about Earth First that really appealed to me.
There was a group that unfortunately called themselves anarchists, which were known as the Black Bloc. And they were quite the opposite of us pacifist anarchists. They were violent anarchists. And they took over all the headlines.
Ammon's idea was that if you were inclined towards anarchism, that you really needed to be a pacifist at the same time, which meant that you needed to be peaceful towards everybody that you met, and you needed to give nobody cause to use violence against you.
Peter Berrigan went to hear Ammon speak on one of Ammon's many lengthy speaking tours.
My fiancée went with me, and so we listened to Ammon, and he was, I thought, one of the more inspiring people that I have ever met in my life. Probably, I would still say that. And he told about all the adventures that he'd had and things that he'd done, both in terms of nonviolence and just in terms of an amazingly adventurous style of living, and how consistent he had been about the pacifism and the anarchism, and how he made the connection between the two, and then somehow rolled that all up with Catholicism as well, which I didn't understand. I wasn't particularly interested in trying Catholicism, but I was very interested in the connection, in the nexus there between pacifism and anarchism. And so he had quite an effect on my life.
A lot of young people come to us. It's a pacifist anarchist movement. And they come to us to learn more about this point of view of beginning a change from the bottom up rather than from the top down.
Dorothy used the term anarchist and anarchism, not anarchy. And she was a great follower of Kropotkin. And most of the people who came to the work were of a religious bent, you know. And they were, I think, put off by this anarchism. And I'd say, but Dorothy, they don't know what you mean. And she said, well, I mean the anarchism of Kropotkin, mutual aid and, you know, all that. I said, but they never heard of that. Well, she tried to sell the ideas without pressing too hard on anarchism.
I went to jail with Ammon Hennacy and Dorothy Day for 30 days. I was 20 years old the day I met them. Dorothy just said to me, we plead guilty and we don't take bail. Ammon Hennacy and Dorothy Day were influenced by the industrial workers of the world, the labor movement at the turn of the 20th century, which was also based on building a different economic society in which workers had control of their own industries, the one big industrial union.
While he was in prison, he became a Christian because he had only the Bible to read, and he read the Sermon on the Mount, probably read it many, many, many times, memorized it.
But he was not intimidated. And I know that he went into solitary confinement for 9 months. And at some point there was light, because the only thing he had to read was the Bible. And he read it from cover to cover. And he was converted at that time, as a young man, to Christianity, but not to Catholicism, not to any sect or religion, but to Jesus Christ, and to the nonviolent Jesus Christ, who said, love your enemies, turn the other cheek, and resist not the evildoer. And Ammon was good at that. He could resist the evil and still love the person and still rejoice in the person. And I think he did that all his life.
On Thanksgiving Day in 1949, Ammon Hennacy wrote this poem.
Love without courage and wisdom
is sentimentality.
As with the ordinary church member.
Courage without love and wisdom
is foolhardiness.
As with the ordinary soldier.
Wisdom without love and courage
is cowardice.
As with the ordinary intellectual.
Therefore, one who has love, courage, and wisdom
is one in a million who moves the world.
As with Jesus, Buddha, and Gandhi, and Dorothy Day.
Anarchism, philosophically, is a noble thing. It's a good thing. St. John of the Cross says we must be free from every kind of attachment. not only worldly attachments, but even spiritual attachments. That can be a real distraction from true spirituality. He says, and here, there is no way as for the just person, there is no law. Yeah. There is no law. If you've reached a certain level of justice and holiness, spirituality, there's no more law. There's no law. That's anarchism in its perfect form.
Ammon Hennacy was born in 1893, Dorothy Day in 1897. So Ammon Hennacy was 20 years old in 1913. They didn't even know there was going to be a world war. So to them, the influences on their youth, it was the class war, the war between workers and capitalism for the control of people's work. So Ammon Hennacy and Dorothy Day, the great influences that made radicals out of them were the Haymarket martyrs who were hung, the case of Sacco and Vanzetti, the anarchists who were again framed, and these were the radicalizing influences on Ammon Hennacy and Dorothy Day and the people of that World War I generation of resistors and radicals. Now they passed on the vision to this wonderful generation of that tiny group of people who resisted participation in World War II.
I'm an anarchist myself. I always stood for pacifism.
At the time of the Korean War and just before the Vietnam War, we were growing up. Our radical vision was formed by that generation of World War II resistors.
It was Ammon's idea to have a sit-down strike against the air raid drills. When the air raid whistle blow, you're supposed to get off the street for 15, 20 minutes. He says, we're going to go out and sit in the park.
It was a genius idea. He said, Dorothy, I'm not going to play that war game. That's a psychological preparation for war. It has nothing to do with defense. It's a lie. I'm going to sit in the park. Hoping, of course, that Dorothy would say, I'll sit with you, which she, of course, did. Then he walked a few blocks away to the War Resisters League, where we had old friends, and he told the War Resisters League what he wanted to do.
Civil defense here in this city was destroyed not by Dorothy Day, but in a sense by those of us at the WRL who came after Dorothy Day, who saw what she had done and said, let's organize a lot of people to oppose the civil defense rules, and we did. We got 1,000 people out one year, and they arrested 50 of them, and we got 2,000 the next year. They arrested 100 of them, and that was the last year they had any civil defense drills, because we had organized 2,000 people to go down to City Hall Park. Dorothy didn't do that. She was witnessing, and her witness moved me. And I'm a political person, and I organized it into a framework that others could take part in.
The idea that New York State was projecting at the time was that we should practice defense against nuclear war. We were supposed to be in the basements and inside the high-rise buildings in New York City practicing hiding under tables to protect ourselves from a nuclear attack.
So there's a dialectic between Dorothy as a saint who's witnessing and myself as a Marxist bureaucratic politician who tries to organize around that. And both have their value. That is, both have a place. My tendency is to think the world can be changed, but only if you accept the value both of Ammon Hennacy and the people like myself who are not nearly as saintly as Ammon.
We need to put our bodies across the line. As a part of this movement to close the School of the Americas, we've had a time-honored tradition of using civil disobedience, where people are willing to take a personal responsibility for how their tax dollars are used and cross the line onto the School of the America. I think some of the ways that we see the idea of anarchism and the idea of Christianity overlapping is within the Catholic worker movement. When we talk about the Catholic worker movement, we're talking about a movement where people took personal responsibility to transform their communities, and they see the basis for that in the gospel call to live in justice, the gospel call for nonviolence. When we look at that very specific gospel call, what we see is a need for us to live in community.
We're lucky that we live in community, and we generally have pretty good community support. It's hard for the kids, but they're pretty resilient. Well, let's see, I came to the Worker in '87, and I lived at Dorothy Day House, Catholic Worker in Washington, D.C. We did hospitality to formerly homeless families, and we did a lot of activism. There's just so many issues in the city. We've always been involved in anti-nuclear work. We did a lot of housing advocacy in the mid-'80s.
And the Catholic worker movement was born when Peter and Dorothy met. Peter was a man that at 14 entered the Christian Brothers in France. He was a Frenchman. He came from peasant stock, and I think at 21 he left the Christian Brothers and legally immigrated to Canada and illegally walked across into the U.S. And Peter had wonderful ideas.
When the Irish were Greek scholars, the Irish spoke Greek as well as Irish, but now Irish is Greek to the Irish. Now the Irish shout with the Anglo-Saxons. Business is business. Keep smiling. Watch your steps. The law of supply and demand. Competition is the life of trade. Your dollar is your best friend. So what?
I mean, Ammon would have married Dorothy in a minute. He was in love with her. He was totally in love with her. But she had a great problem with his romantic attachment to her because she felt she couldn't respond to it. She used to say, I like a man to be strong. I like a man to be able to support me morally. Ammon is too tender for me. He's too gentle for me. I could never love him. And he loved me, and I had to constantly reject him. And it's a constant pain in the neck. Of course, at the same time, she admired him very much.
Joan Thomas is Ammon Hennacy's second wife. She was 41 years younger than Ammon.
I mean, I am an anarchist, yes, but it demands a very high degree of spiritual enlightenment, which comes through the grace of God. You know, but for God's grace, I could be a capitalist. I mean, we have to be very thankful, you know, there, but for God's grace, we're not capitalists.
I think one of the other connections that we see is that in the early Christian communities, essentially those early Christian communities following the example of Christ and Paul were personalist anarchist communities, autonomous, making decisions collectively for themselves.
We must obey God rather than the state, Peter said, when brought before the Sanhedrin. And that's the first expression of Christian anarchism. If you don't like the word God, then substitute truth. But I'm a theist and a Catholic Christian. Now, some other anarchists might say, no, I can't be an anarchist because I believe in God, or because I'm a member of a hierarchical and authoritarian church.
You know, Jesus didn't act alone. There's a reason Jesus invited 12 people to join him. So I think we need to take that really seriously, that it allows us, to fight the system or continue our activism, is you need that support and you need that community. And so David Solnit is a wondrous activist here in the Bay Area, part of Direct Action to Stop the War, helped create Art and Revolution, integrating the arts and culture into activism.
Just as we fight for our time and space right now in our cities, people in 1886 fought to get an 8-hour day for more control of their time in 1886 and won it through a national general strike. And that's why we celebrate May Day all over the world now.
Well, what I do mainly is relief graphics. They're mostly labor-oriented, anti-war oriented, or oriented toward a sane ecology. To be a true pacifist takes guts. And I've known a few. My mother was one. Ammon was always 100%. My parents knew him when he was a socialist and when he was IWW. And he spent his declining years as a Catholic anarchist. I call myself an anarcho-syndicalist as a member of the industrial workers of the world. I believe things should be controlled by the employees.
Ammon Hennacy was the apostle of the one-man revolution. His very American, rugged individualism, his quintessential American radical, couldn't have come from any place else. And he challenged other people to be truthful to their own insights. He held up a standard. It was a very high standard of personal integrity and devotion, consistency, and he thereby energized the peace movement.
Well, we were both very much admirers of Ammon Hennacy, who certainly did do things on his own. We publish books that we think will be useful to people in their struggle against imperialism and against war. And we hope that they'll be thoughtful in their use of ideas. We do publish a book on direct action and sabotage, which is an old book from the IWW days, basically a classic.
Joe Hill is a very important person for today. He's not only American labor's most famous martyr, he's also American labor's greatest, most popular songwriter all through the years. His songs are still sung on picket lines and demonstrations today.
I am Mary Lathrop, and this is the only portrait I've so far done of Dorothy. Ammon wanted to invite me to come out and help him start Joe Hill House. Catholic worker life, in spite of all the problems, is a lot more exciting than working in a rectory. I went out to Salt Lake City.
And we have on our stationery this Joe Hill being shot that Mary painted on the wall, 12 by 15. And underneath it, we say, from Peter Moran, the co-founder of the Catholic Worker with Dorothy Day, we have to put up with each other the way God puts up with us. God's going to have to take care of Hennacy. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm an anarchist. I'm not expecting the government to. And you see, the city of Salt Lake and the Salvation Army in Salt Lake do not take care of the transients that jump off freights. Well, I'm doing a thing the rest won't do. That's all right. And by the time I do that long enough and picket long enough and talk against the blood atonement and capital punishment.
Well, we published a book of Waltrain de Clare's poems, and it's been a very popular book, written in red. She was a famous anarchist woman in Philadelphia. She had an extremely interesting life and was very inspired by the Haymarket martyrs.
Ah, broken hearts were the price of these. The lips of their anguish are cold and still. For them are the clouds and the glooms all past. No longer the woe of the world can thrill the chords of those tender hearts or fill the silent dead house, the people's will. Dearly you'll weep that ye did not save. Do you not hear now the muffled drum, the trampling feet and the ceaseless hum of the million marchers trembling dumb in their tread to a yawning giant grave? See, the ground hisses with red streaming blood clots of long frozen ire, waked by the flying wild voices as it passes, groaning and crying. The surge of the masses rolls and flashes with thunderous roar, seams and lashes the livid shore.
You know, I grew up in rural Americana. I also grew up in the church, in the conservative church, and although sex was, worse than, premarital sex was worse than war, a lot of people were having premarital sex. It kind of is this self-righteousness that leads to hypocrisy. So
perhaps it would be more honest to say that in the United States the national religion has become shopping, and that the television offers the preaching for this religion, and the shopping malls offer the place of worship, and that's where people tend to invest their sense of worth, their sense of identity, their sense of what they crave. And the churches, the ones that look like churches, often, again, are a smokescreen for the real religion, which has everything to do with consumption. I think if people think for a while about what they want to entrust to their children, it wouldn't be this capacity to just engage in endless consumption. That's not what people want for their children.
But shopping is also the great escape for people that don't really want to face the pain and deal with the suffering. It's just another one of those escapes, just like alcohol and drugs are. Anything that will distract our attention from the pain and the suffering that exists. And I think what happens with any escape, the problem with it, is that what you're escaping from never gets addressed. And in fact, it will continue to get worse and worse.
But of course, the 4.5% of the population of the world that lives in the United States is consuming at least a third, if not closer to half, the world's resources. That can only happen through theft at gunpoint. It's what we've been doing for a long time. It's just now getting more desperate.
It seems that we have got it quite in reverse. When we think of the man Jesus allowing himself, in a sense, to be led by the love for children, that's the leadership that I want to follow. I think to be able to ask what's happening concretely to children because of those policies that our country is developing. How can we commit ourselves to the cares and concerns of children and to preserving the children? You can find the direction if you keep focusing on those questions. Where are the children? Where are the poor children? What's happening to them?
So we're at the Anarchist Cafe at Martin DePore's, but it's too loud, we gotta go someplace else. You know, punk rock served a really important moment for a lot of us, and it was also speaking, I think, to the frustration, the alienation for a lot of teenage youth. Not just have a sense of alienation and individually deal with that, but to come together with other people and try to understand the roots around consumer capitalism and the culture of greed that a lot of us were growing up with. And so punk rock very much connected the frustration to a broader politics that started looking at issues around race and class and gender and sexuality and putting it into a much larger context that allowed me and my friends to be able to think about the experience we were having in relationship to the experience other people were having, and seeing the ways that oppression, exploitation operate in the world, and how we as teenagers were able to organize and try to make a difference and come together. And anarchism was a politics that expressed that kind of social change possibilities.
I try to get the people to understand the nuclear energy is not the way. Radiation is I've been saying it for many years. It's gonna thin our life for us, not only a human, but all the living things. So we already began to see that. Then the DOE, there's the Nuclear Energy Department, as they call themselves. They said they weren't going to test at the Nevada test site anymore. Everybody believed that. But I kept telling the people, you cannot believe our government, because they're the one that's pushing all of this.
I belong to no organization, and I own only what I wear and just the few things I carry in my little pockets. I just walk until given shelter, fast until given food. And of course, a pilgrim walks on faith. I have no money. I don't accept any money. I walk on that endless energy that comes with inner peace. It never runs out. You know, there's a spark of good in everybody. No matter how deeply buried, it's right there. It's waiting to govern every life gloriously. That spark of good is the real you. I will say that the real turning point in my life came when I came out of my empty life of money and things and began to live to give instead of to get. Oh, it was just the most wonderful change in my life. My life just blossomed out. I knew my life work was going to be work for peace. Not only the outer peace, but the inner peace, which I talk about the most, because that's where peace begins.
I've designed a great seal for the University of California, Los Alamos. The Great Seal of the University of California has an open book, and it says, "Let there be light." Well, here in Los Alamos, it's got to be, "Let there be nuclear light." That can come from an exploding bomb, a nuclear power plant, or from the sun. In Bombs We Trust is typically Los Alamos. 1943 is approximately the start of the nuclear age, the start of Los Alamos. And 2013, just 10 years from now, it's all over for everybody. I see an American with an American weapon of mass destruction destroying Washington, D.C. And we've got 20 Trident submarine commanders out there.
The Hopi, delegation of Hopis came to New York to deliver their message of imminent destruction of the world to the United Nations. And we met them out in front of the house at 223 Christie Street, and then I drove them and Ammon up to the United Nations, where they met with some officials, low-level officials, I imagine, and who were polite, but who didn't take it all too seriously, I guess.
Here's some of Ammon Hennacy's couple pieces of the bone that was left over after he was cremated. His cremains, you might say. He was cremated in 1970 after suffering a heart attack carrying a picket sign. So he died 6 days later in January 1970.
That year, the Ammon Hennacy House of Hospitality was started by Los Angeles Catholic workers.
So it's pretty powerful holding these in your hand.
Ammon's value, which was enormous, was that he was stubborn, he was persistent, he would not be moved from what he thought was right. He was going to make you think about the nuclear bomb because he was going to go on a fast every Hiroshima Day, I think, for however many years it had been since the bomb had gone off. And you had to therefore sort of think about those issues, because here is Ammon walking around the federal building saying he hadn't paid taxes and that he was fasting because of the nuclear bomb. And you could say, well, Ammon is a nut. Well, he wasn't a nut, first of all, but that's not so important as the fact that after you said Ammon is a nut, you said, why is he doing this? So Ammon also said, if I can do it, you can do it. He also said, if I can do it, you should be doing it. But he opened the door of possibilities.
We have on our window, we have this from Debs, Mary Lathrop printed there. While there's lower caste, I am in it. While there's a soul in prison, I am not free.
I don't look to government as a way of achieving peace. Peace is going to have to come about from individuals finding peace within themselves. And once individuals find peace within themselves, what happens is that there's a promotion of more and more peaceful interactions around them. And if we can get more and more people to be in that state, then we will have more and more peace.
The lady on the left said that property is theft. They ran her out of town to keep her mouth shut, but J. Edgar Hoover couldn't move her from my heart. Emma, 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 Emma Goldman. Emma, 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 hey!
Join our campaign for disarmament and disrupt the big business of war. Come new abolitionists like the abolitionists who abolished slavery. We are going to abolish nuclear weapons and war forever.
I saw her screaming about the meaning of the black flag. She said that if she can't dance, then it's not her revolution. A year in the slammer couldn't keep her mouth shut. A J. Edgar Hoover couldn't move her from my heart. Emma, 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 Emma Goldman. Emma, 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 hey!
One way to love our enemies, friends, is to work hard to stop our government from their plans to kill them.
She said to me that the state is my enemy. The lady on the left said that property is theft. Yeah! They chased her around the world to keep her mouth shut, but J. Edgar Hoover couldn't move her from my heart. Emma, 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 Emma Goldman. Emma, 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 hey! Emma, Emma, Emma Goldman. Emma, 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 hey!
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.